Tranquility du Jour, bringing you tranquility since 2005. Hello, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 465th edition of Tranquility du Jour. Tranquility du Jour is a series of nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with tranquility. So I've been away for the past couple of weeks. Well, away, still in DC, but not podcasting. Tim gave me permission to take a couple of weeks off. He's like, people go dark in August. So my apologies if anyone's been refreshing their app going, where is Tranquility du Jour? So my thought moving forward is that I'm actually going to transition to every other week, which is what I've done for years. But this year I just kind of had so much to share that I went to weekly. But I think I'm going to go back to every other week, with the intention of the week in between being a Tea with Kimberly video. And these are basically just short videos where I share some tip or tool that helps with finding tranquility in the everyday. So watch for those, and this will all happen in the fall, so at some point in September. But I just wanted to give you the heads up that we'll be moving to every other week for the podcast, and the great news is you'll also get every other week videos, Tea with Kimberly. Today, I'm going to be discussing pet loss and grief, which is something that affects so many people. And I recently led a support group and did a blog post and got a lot of great feedback. So I thought it might be nice to turn this into an audio version also to share with you. And even if you don't have pets, to even better understand what pet owners, beloved companion animal owners, go through in this process. Now, before we dive in, a few things. I wanted to remind you that you can get love notes, and one will be going out this week. And you can sign up for this at kimberlywilson.com/love notes, or just head over to /465, where you'll find this podcast, the show notes for it. And you'll get exclusive content, personal updates, giveaways. There may be a Tony Bennett playlist coming this week, and all sorts of things not shared elsewhere. And it also gives you access to Tranquil Treasures, which is a treasure trove of PDFs, MP3s, videos, and more. I want to say a big thank you to those of you who have taken the time to post a review over on iTunes about the podcast or Amazon about any of the books. And I wanted to share the latest one that came in about the day book from Linda P. She says, I have searched for a planner that I could use daily that is not so business looking, more feminine, but useful. This daybook reminds me to set my goals, have dreams, that life isn't all about the 8 to 5, and makes me stop and think about how I want to move forward. I just love it, and it will be my planner going forward. Thank you so much, Linda P. A, for your support, and B, for penning the review on Amazon. So grateful. And thank you to everyone, too, who has supported this daybook that came out in June. And I'll be doing more on it as we get kind of more towards the end of the year. And people are getting ready to set their planners up for 2020. I can't believe it. And I'll also be setting mine up then. So I'll be showing inside peeks and whatnot. So stay tuned for that. Also, a reminder for the podcast. We are about to celebrate our 14th year in September. And you can find all the various episodes at kimberlywilson.com/podcast. And then there's also an app, so you can download it and listen on the go. And you can subscribe to Tranquility du Jour in your favorite podcast app, such as Apple Podcast, Overcast, or whatever you may enjoy. Also, I wanted to mention a few upcoming events that may pique your interest. Free Tranquility du Jour Live happening September 15th. So this is our last one of 2019. I do these seasonally. So the next one will be New Year at the beginning of 2020. So if you are interested, you can sign up. There's a link in the show notes and also over at kimberlywilson.com. Again, it's a free 1-hour video gathering at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on a Sunday night. And it's just a sweet way to connect with our online community and also to learn 8 new tips to find tranquility in the new season. Those of you up north in the Montreal, Canada area, I'll be up September 21st through 22nd, leading yoga, business, and mindfulness workshops at Luna Yoga. Also, local ladies, we have a 4-week Tranquility Salon happening September 29th through October 20th. And there are 2 spots left for this. Links to this also in the show notes. And Tranquility Salon Online is going to be launching in September and would love to have you join us for this. So this experience is basically taking the 4-week in-person course and turning it into an online offering for those of you who live outside of Washington, D.C., or simply can't make the Sunday night offering in Washington, D.C. So would love to have you join us for that. And there will be a link in the show notes to join the wait list for it so that you can know as soon as it goes live when it's happening. And also, we're going to be doing our 2nd annual Pugs and Pints event here in Washington, D.C. at a brewery on October 27th. And this is to raise money for pig sanctuaries and pug rescues. You can bring your pug or bring your other 4-legged friend or leave them at home and just come and have a beer and some vegan nosh and support Pigs and Pugs Project. Also, there's more in the show notes that you can find about some things that are coming up. The last thing I wanted to mention, though, is we will be doing a retreat to France in probably summer 2020, and I am asking for your feedback. Do you want Paris? Do you want Provence? What activities are you most interested in? And would love, love, love your input. So there is a link in the show notes, again, KimberlyWilson.com/465, where you can give me your opinion and help shape the experience. All right, so now let's dive into chatting a bit about pet loss and grief. So the tricky thing with this is, unfortunately, I have a bit of experience with it from losing my beloved family cat and dog as a grade schooler and in junior high to losing my own pets just a few years ago, my kind of firstborn, my first pug and my first black kitty. And, you know, having been through this, I know how incredibly painful it is. And so whenever I found out about University of Tennessee's veterinary social work program, I was really excited to be able to dive into it, where one of the modules is pet loss and grief. And there's so much more to learn about this in order to be able to share it and to help others through the process, because it is honestly quite long and tough. So for example, we lost beloved Louie, who many of podcast listeners probably remember sweet Louie. He was, I hate to say the love of my life because I do love my Tim, but you know, Louie was my love. And we lost him in 2015. So, right, it's been 4 years and yet I still can't really talk about it. Even Tim brought something up recently and I was like, I can't go there, can't talk about it, stop. So it's like, you know, you would think after 4 years you would be able to talk, and yet it's really one of those things that is just so incredibly painful. And also what's interesting is there's articles out there that's like, why losing my dog was worse than losing my family member. And, you know, the tricky thing there, which I think that makes this so challenging, is there's what's called disenfranchised grief. And what that means is it's grieving something that is not necessarily supported or acknowledged by society. For example, you know, losing an ex, right? Losing a job, losing a pet. So things a lot, or having a miscarriage, right? So these are things that people don't really know what to say. And not that they necessarily, you know, we never really know what to say, right? When someone's grieving, it's always hard, but yet particularly around these topics that can fall under disenfranchised grief. And the tough thing is it makes it even harder, right? Because people will just say, oh, go get another one, get another cat, get another dog, get another gerbil, you know, whatever it is. And yet, you know, no one would ever say, oh, just go get another mom. And so this makes it, I think, a little bit harder. And that's where, you know, one of the first things we learn about pet loss and grief is the challenge of disenfranchised grief. The fact that it is just simply minimized by society and there's no recognized way of grieving, right? There's no funeral, although you could have one, and I will talk about that. But there's really no kind of set way to process this. And I think that is one of the pieces that makes it incredibly tricky. Another thing that comes up with pet loss and grief that is quite challenging, and I'm going to be sharing some coping strategies and then also going through Warden's 4 tasks of mourning that is applicable, of course, not only to pets, but to loss of many things. And yet I do think it applies nicely to pet loss. But one of the big pieces that comes up around pet loss and grief is guilt, right? Guilt of either having to euthanize a pet and either doing it what they may feel like, oh, it was too soon, we could have had more time, or doing it too late, we held on too long, our pet was suffering. And so that's one of the pieces that comes up a lot around this. And, the tricky thing is, one vet that I spoke with, she said, the thing about the guilt with euthanasia or letting an animal, hang on too long or feeling like, oh, it was we didn't give enough time, is that if we can reframe it of recognizing like it really is, to a degree, it's a privilege to be able to minimize their suffering. Not that it's like, oh, then the guilt goes away, but to recognize that it really is, it's like a gift. I mean, I remember for us with Louis, it was like, okay, once his quality of life shifts substantially, we have to let him go. It's just not fair to hang on. And so, we knew when it was time. And what was helpful is both Tim and I, we were on the same page. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes couples or friends or family members, they're on different pages. Oh, definitely not yet. Or, oh my gosh, we should have done this a year ago, or whatever it can be. And so that also makes it hard, right? Of recognizing, okay, when do we let go if ultimately this is the way the pet's life will end? And so the guilt piece is really, it definitely, I think, comes up a lot with loss in general, but particularly around animals, because we can feel as if it was in our hands, and that's so, so painful. And yet it also is a gift, right? Because like Louis at the end, he had brain cancer, so he was having seizures and he was having clusters, which is just like a few at a time. And it was devastating. It was something that we were like, there's no way we can, keep him dealing with this, going through this. And so to be able to help him through the process was as torturous as it was like, thank God we didn't have to, continue to see him suffering, because that is so painful. The other thing is like, okay, so what do we do with this pain? The thing is, typically they say grief in general is about 6 months to 1 year, but it's not at the 1 year mark. It's like, oh, everything's better even at 6 months. But the most intense is clearly within the first 1 to 2 months. Now, of course, this varies for everyone, but this is kind of like the overview, right, with regard to grief. So to recognize it's not immediate. It's not quick. It's one of those things that will definitely hang on. And what's tricky too, another piece that is tough with this, is there's guilt around, what if I get another pet too soon? What if it's like, I never can adopt another pet because it was just too painful. So there's so much guilt that comes up around this. And what's interesting is I remember, so we lost Louis on a Thursday, and that weekend I was looking online going like, oh my God, I have to have another dog, because I was like, the hole in my heart was just so freaking huge. And someone at the support group even said he was like on his computer a couple days later, like with the curtains closed, like ducking down, looking online, trying to see like, oh, can we find another one to adopt? And, you feel guilty, right? Because you're like, oh my gosh, like how can this being ever be replaced? And they can't be replaced. But, some people I think are just meant to have them in their lives. And if they don't have them, there's a really empty feeling. And that's a tricky thing too. I keep saying tricky. This whole process is so freaking tricky. But that's the tough part also, is that these beings are part of our everyday life. Like my dogs tell me when it's time to get up around 7 a.m. because they would like to eat and use the bathroom. So my whole kind of routine really does revolve around them. So say you lose a sibling, or you lose a parent or a grandparent that you no longer live with, right? Your world no longer revolves around their daily routine. And, you may not be caretaking for them like you are with a pet. And I think that's one of the pieces too that makes it so hard, is because your daily routine is completely shifted with their absence. So, a few coping strategies that can be helpful to work through this process. I highly would recommend looking for a support group. There are support groups even online. There's this one I wanted to mention called Rainbow's Bridge. And what's nice about this is there's like a virtual support group, and I believe it's Monday nights, and then like you light a candle for your animal. And I think, you just go in and you click something. I can't remember. I know we did it for Bonard, my kitty, who passed in 2013. And what was funny is Tim was actually in California. He was on a bike tour. And so he went up to the top of a hill so he could get a signal to dial in to attend this like online memorial service, for sweet Bonard. And, it's just things like this that can be quite helpful, particularly if you don't have a support group nearby, which many people don't. So having an online support group of sorts where people get it, people understand it. So that is one thing that can be quite helpful. Definitely talking to someone also. I think a therapist, a grief counselor, a friend, somebody who like specializes in this, has been through it, is understanding and supportive. And also the thing is to ask yourself, if I had a close friend that was experiencing this, what would I do for them? And to recognize like, okay, how can I do this for myself? Right? Because if you think about it with people, there's a funeral and like people will bring food to your home, so that you don't have to deal with getting kind of daily life pulled together initially. It's like you're supported. And again, that just doesn't necessarily happen with a pet. So thinking about what can you do, A, to keep the continuing bond with this animal, which I'll give some ideas, but also B, to nourish yourself in a way that, society won't necessarily be prepared to nourish you in. Now, you're going to have some good friends. Of course, you reach out or send flowers or, bring food or do things along those lines. I remember a yoga studio, my managing director at that time, who was so freaking phenomenal. She got people together to donate money to buy a star, and that was named Louie. And so it was just like, thoughtful gestures like that they mean so, so much. And so thinking about this too, when and if you have a family member or a friend who loses a pet, what can you do to help memorialize that pet for this friend? So to keep the continuing bond, really the idea with this is like, how do we stay connected to this being when we're no longer caring for this being every single day? And so maybe writing a letter, there's writing a letter that's like about the little critter, the little being, or even, writing a letter to the being, right? This can be a really sweet way too, if there's anything that you're like, you want to say that you didn't get to say, or you wish you'd said, or, just a way even to, as if you're writing a letter to a friend and telling them about your beloved being. I remember after I lost Bonard, it was over the weekend, and that Monday, I believe I wrote this really long post, and I'll link to it in the show notes, about him and, and all the crazy antics, because this cat was like, craziness. He was super mean to everyone but me, and just a hot mess. I loved him so, so much, as we all do, right? And so being able to write about it can be quite compelling. Drawing pictures, taking and going through photos, right, of happier, healthier times. Having their favorite toys. So Louis had this little teddy bear we called Teddy, who he was obsessed with. Until the end, he didn't have interest in Teddy anymore, I think, because he would just, he wasn't right. He wasn't himself. And, so we had little Teddy up for a long time, just kind of sitting out on a shelf along with his collar. And, we have since, I've put him away in a suitcase, like a vintage suitcase with a lot of memorial things about Sweet Louie. But, having that out for a long time helped. I still have his urn out. I have this beautiful necklace that Cynthia, who is a listener, had made and sent to me. Then also a pillow that another listener had, and that's on our bed. So all these little things that remind us, I think, make such a difference. We also have a little stone out in our garden, and we created a little memorial garden, and it has Louis and a paw print that we got off of Etsy. So, their favorite toys, their collars, any clips of hair or braided tails, say it's a horse or, a dog with a super long tail. Photo albums. My mother created this darling scrapbook. So of course I have that, being able to go through that, or even creating a photo album with what you have. Memory boxes can be another way. So as I mentioned, that piece of vintage suitcase, so that's kind of a memory box of sorts, because there's all sorts of things, from all the sweet letters and notes and cards that we received from people to a lot of his favorite things are in there. Planting a tree or flowers and doing a memorial garden. As I mentioned, we did on our back patio, but, sometimes people will do these, you can have a bench or, all sorts of things that are dedicated to this being. Even with like a rescue or a sanctuary, you could have, a building, a plaque on a building, or like a brick or something that you donate in this being's honor. And donating some of their toys to local shelters, or even money to a shelter in the pet's memory. And then also the clay print paws. Sometimes people will do little paw prints in wet clay that, then they always have their paw prints. And these are just some ways that can be helpful, right, to keep that continuing bond. And then also to recognize, okay, what coping strategies have you had in the past with other losses? And that might be helpful to keep in mind. One of the things that comes up for a lot of people is feeling just like lethargic, inability to focus at work. You're just not yourself. It's like a cloud is over you. And I've always described it too as like being encased in concrete. And so what can you do to help yourself during this time? And I think a lot of it is to really softening expectations and doing what you can to get the rest and support that you need. And it may honestly just be a lot of sleeping and a lot of resting. So the next piece I wanted to dive into and share is William Warden's 4 Tasks of Mourning. And his thing is, he says that there are 4 tasks that we must accomplish for the process of mourning to be completed and equilibrium to be reestablished. But he makes it clear that there is no particular order, that these have to go through. So there's 4 tasks, but they may go in different orders. So the first task is accepting the reality of the loss, right? And so with pets, I think that's the hard thing, because again, they're your morning, they're your evening, they're your weekends, everything in between. And, even like, say it's a family member, it might be like, oh, I used to call, so-and-so every Sunday night or something along those lines. So recognizing, the reality of the loss, it's so hard. And then task 2 is working through the pain of grief. And so what this means is, dealing with the sadness, fear, loneliness, despair, hopelessness, anger, guilt, blame, shame, relief, and countless others. There are so many emotions that we go through when grieving. And the thing about this is it's really important that we go through these versus denying them or avoiding them. And so being in the really kind of dark, kind of murky place of all these emotions is an important piece of grief. Task 3 is adjusting to the environment in which the pet is missing. Okay, this is so hard, and it can take a long time. Particularly, you may have certain things that you just always did, like on your birthday, you always went to a particular dog park, or on their birthday, or, all these sorts of things. Because what's interesting is, like, Louis's birthday is the same as Eminem's birthday, which I love. And, he passed away in April. And so every April and October, I just feel it's like, usually I'm aware that the date's approaching, but if I'm not, I will I'll just notice that I feel different. Like my body's different. It's like the body knows, the body remembers. And it's definitely a lethargy and something that can be quite hard to explain. But so you'll notice like these adjustments, right, of recognizing the environment. Everything is just so different without this being in your life. And so, knowing that when these anniversaries come up, these birthdays, these special things you used to do together, maybe every Sunday morning you went to, a particular dog park or dog beach. And, it's a big shift in that way. And of course, all the daily walks and the feedings and what have you, and the vet visits. And then task 4 is finding an enduring connection with the pet while embarking on a new life. And so what this means is to find an appropriate kind of ongoing connection in our emotional lives with the pet while allowing us to keep living. So thinking about how do we keep that continuing bond going, and but we also keep moving forward in our lives. So recognizing that it's important to keep going, but not to be like, peace out, I'm getting a new pet, which of course we would never do, but it's, we kind of can't do, right? But it's recognizing like, okay, how do I also keep my continued bond with this animal while moving forward in my life? So those are Warden's 4 tasks of grieving. And again, his thing is you have to go through all 4 of those before you're through the mourning process. And this, of course, applies to, all sorts of losses, but since today we're talking about pet loss and grief, I wanted to mention these and thought they may be helpful as you think about how you process and can process and work through the grief process, which is so hard, so individual. So again, just in summary, the importance of recognized disenfranchised grief, which means it's going to be a little harder, right? Because it's not necessarily something that society is going to recognize. Keeping that continued bond with your animal in whatever way feels right. And one of the things I didn't mention really is having a memorial service, like having people over. I remember I lost Fishy, a fish that I had had for like 5 years. And we played like a little song and we buried little Fishy in the backyard. So we had like a little memorial, for Fishy. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that you can do this. I mean, sometimes it's just you're in too much pain to kind of pull something like that together. But, why not have something that feels like a sense of closure that, society typically gets with the death of a loved one. And of course, there are memorial gardens and pet cemeteries all over that. There's one that's amazing. It's called Angel's Rest, and it is at Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in Utah, Kanab, Utah. And we walked through it last year when we did a workshop there. And oh my gosh, it's so powerful. There's wind chimes everywhere, and there's all sorts. There's like collars and all sorts of things that, are used to memorialize a pet. And it's just so thoughtful and it means a lot. So having, your pet in a place like that may be something that would mean a lot to you. And then, of course, going through the 4 tasks: 1, accepting the reality of loss; 2, working through the pain; 3, adjusting to the new normal; and then 4, keeping that enduring connection with your beloved pet while also continuing to move forward in life, which may or may not mean adopting a new pet. So in closing, I just want to say, thank you for listening to this podcast. I'm going to go through a few savvy sources in a moment, but I just wanted to say that this is one of those things that I think is so hard, and getting support is really important. And also, there's a lot of sweet books out there. There's a book I came across in Paris last year called Goodbye Mousy, and it's so sad, but it's like this kid's beloved mouse passes away. I was like crying in the bookstore reading it. But, it's helpful too, because having family members, or kids that are just like, they don't understand, there's a lot of great books out there, but honestly, they're great for adults too. And another one that someone gave me and that I will often send to friends who lose a pet is A Dog's Heaven. And I believe there's also A Cat's Heaven. And it is a children's book, but it's still super powerful for adults. So Thank you for tuning into this podcast, and I hope it's been helpful as you think about how to move forward in this process or even prepare for the loss, the upcoming or impending loss of, an animal that might be sick or elderly right now. So savvy sources mentioned in the podcast, I've got the blog post about pet loss and grief that I wrote. Also, I'm going to have the link to losing Lay Pug, and then also my Bonard post whenever I said goodbye to Bonard. And that might just give an example about writing about the little beings, and how kind of cathartic that can be. And then takeaways today. I'd love it if you would share a pic of your beloved pets or pets. You may have 4 as we do, and use hashtag TDJ podcast. I'd love to see them. I want to see your sweet little pets. Oftentimes they will join us for TDJ lives or online live events, and it's so much fun. Also, take a screenshot of you listening to the show, maybe even listening to the show with a furry 4-legged friend or 2-legged, and tag me at Tranquility du Jour. And again, if you have a moment to share a review on iTunes or Amazon, you may just hear it shared on the show. So one final thing is that Tranquility's fall collection will be launching this week. And you can find the 6 new designs, including a darling leopard print scarf and all sorts of fun things over at tranquility.com. There is a link to that in the show notes, and I hope you love the fall collection. And if you sign up for the mailing list, you get 10% off your first purchase. And again, thank you so much for tuning in today, and I wish you a wonderful week ahead. Namaste.